Hi, greetings everyone. A very warm welcome to this webinar for today, where we are going to discuss issue that we have also brought up many times before, which is the electronic waste plastics. And just to broadly share with you, this is the fifth season of the webinar series that we started, the Circular Economy Knowledge Series. And this is our second episode in this series in the fifth season. So really looking forward to have a deep dialogue on multiple topics. And this series is essentially focused on bringing up topics which are very relevant this journey on the circular economy space. We also aim to enable harmonization across when we talk of standards across multiple countries. So the idea is to really look at what is happening at a global level. What can we learn from these spaces? Where are the systemic challenges? And the idea is to really gather inputs from people from various walks of life. So today we have again a group of people again representing various spaces and sectors. And the primary discussion, like I said, will be focused on plastics emerging from electronic waste. Now, a couple of things that I'd like to point out for today's discussion, that if you have any questions, kindly use the chat box, park your questions, and either during the course of the dialogue or at the end of this dialogue, we will come back to you and we will try to address as many questions as possible. We will also try to keep a question answer session at the end of the session. So in case there is something which is left out, can be covered at that point in time. Now, I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Apple, Dell Technologies, Canon India, Cisco, and Nothing, who have enabled this webinar series in this year. And our long-standing partner, which is WEEE Forum. So I'll also like to acknowledge their support. The primary objective of having WEEE Forum as a knowledge partner is to advance learnings and do cross learning between India and Europe. We also have GIZ as a knowledge partner in this particular seminar. GIZ has been a long-standing partner for us, where we have debated, discussed, and we are trying to solve some of the most critical challenges. This is a challenge that we are trying to solve. Electronic plastics emerging from electronic waste is a challenge that we are trying to solve along with GIZ. So with that, let me introduce the panelists. I'd like to introduce Dr. Reva Prakash. So Reva, if you could put on your camera, that would be helpful for everyone to see you. So Dr. Reva has over 10 years of experience in environmental policy and resource efficiency. She has been working with GIZ for a fairly long time. And her expertise is primarily in the space of circular economy and resource efficiency, again enabling systemic changes via bringing in changes in environmental policy. She holds a PhD in international politics from JNU, New Delhi. Next, let me introduce Dr. Akansha Tyagi. Akansha, would be great if you can also put on your camera. Akansha has over 7 years of experience at CEW, a very recognized name in research space in India now, where she serves as the senior program lead for circular economy and energy transitions. Her work spans circular economy solutions in the renewable energy sector, critical minerals, which is again becoming very, very relevant nowadays, and techno-economic analysis of energy storage systems. So thank you, Akansha, for joining. One more thing about Akansha, she holds a doctorate in human and environmental studies from Kyoto University, Japan, and is a MSc in chemistry from IIT Hyderabad. Last, I'll also like to Steph who brings deep experience in the space and circular economic solutions in the renewable energy sector, critical minerals, which is again becoming very, very relevant nowadays. Thank you. For joining.
I think there seems to be some network issue with Pranchu's feed. I think it's cutting out. So while we figure that out, I think I can continue with Stefan's introduction. So Stefan brings 14 years of professional experience to minimize. He's the CEO and founder. Yes, Kirti.
Sorry, Shubhangi, go ahead. I just was struggling.
Yeah, I figured. So yes, Stefan brings 14 years of professional experience to minimize a circular tech startup he founded that is rooted in documenting e-waste impact in the global south. His work spans building collection projects across formal and informal recycling sectors and developing minimizes ERP software for mass balance documentation and automated reporting. He holds a master's degree from Riga Technical University. So, welcome to all our speakers today. Thank you for taking out the time to speak with us today, because this conversation needs continuous dialogue and tackling this problem from different angles for us to even come up with a solution. I'll be a moderator today. I have been with Karusamba for the past 6 years, with my primary work being in EPR frameworks and circular economy as well. And I currently serve as the project office lead at Karusamba. I also hold a master's from Terry University. While Priyanshu joins us back, I think it would be good for us to set a little bit of context on why e-waste plastics is one topic that we are working so hard towards, because by weight, and we have brought this up before as well, by weight, plastics form a huge part of electronic products. And it's not the normal plastics that we usually talk about, because they have to be modified and engineered to suit electronic products. And these modifications are what differentiate them from the usual plastic packaging that we usually hear conversations about whenever we're talking about plastics. So that's what makes electronic plastics unique. And some of the challenges that we've talked about before, the fact that there's 100 different combinations of the different types, qualities, color, size of plastics in products, the heterogeneity is what often creates so much complexity in figuring out a systems level solution. While at an individual level, we might be able to come up with some solutions for each of these individual polymers. What makes this whole value chain complex is the heterogeneous nature of electronic products in themselves, right? So some of the problems, I think the enormity of the problem, the scale at which we need the systems to occur, not at just India scale. If you want to tackle manufacturing of electronic products and bring materials back into electronic products after recycling, this conversation needs to happen both at a national and an international scale. And one of the key questions that always comes up in this situation is, what does it take to move a market on this? If we need to create a marketplace and none exists right now, naturally, what does it take? And as is the laws of motion, to paraphrase, conditions will continue to be as they are unless there are external forces acting upon them. Those external forces could be demands from buyers organically being created because they are looking for new materials, or dissatisfaction of brands and consumers with the current handling of plastics within the system, or policymakers when they see the kind of opportunities that they're seeing in critical minerals, and they see the same kind of opportunities for plastics. The fact, however, is that currently the demand for plastic recycling, which preserves its qualities, which preserves its engineered nature, which disallows any leaking of brominated flame retardants into the system, that demand currently automatically doesn't exist. And that brings me to my first question to Akanksha, actually you. We often talk about how heterogeneous nature of plastics and electronic products makes it so complicated to come up with a system. But even for homogeneous products, that same problem often arises. CEW has been working on circularity for solar panels, where there is a potential for homogeneous waste to be available from a plastics perspective. What's that experience been like for you? And does it tell you anything about plastics and e-waste?
Thanks, Shivangi, for first of all having me here and providing this platform and asking this question. So solar panels is of course a fairly new product that is being handled both by the recyclers as well as the regulators. Solar panels and cells were introduced in e-waste management rules of 2022, and the mandate there is also fairly weak and open-ended right now. The mandate is just to store the solar waste without having any clear EPR and recycling or recovery targets. Now, to answer your question on where plastics come into solar panels. Solar panels have plastics in two forms. One is a backsheet and the other is an encapsulant. And these are, let's say, the two types of layers which are kind of protecting the solar cell. And you have that as a metallic component, the solar part, and then you have glass, and then there is an aluminium frame. So this is how the basic structure looks like. Now, both backsheet and the encapsulant, they are the polymeric substance. Although they look homogeneous, but of course there is still some sort of heterogeneity in the grade of plastics that's being used, and they keep changing, with the performance that's needed in the solar modules performance that's needed. Mostly they contain fluorinated monomers, and that's how the polymer turns out to be. Now, when we look at this, how big is the share of plastic waste from solar panels? So last year we revised our estimates of how much solar waste would India generate, and we estimated that with the installed capacity alone in this year, in this decade actually, until like 2030, India is likely to see a cumulative solar waste of about 11 million tons by 2047. And the contribution of these two polymeric components, backsheet and encapsulant, is about 10-8%. So I think roughly this translates to about over 1 million ton of plastic waste coming in from solar panels. If we look at how recyclable are these and how these are being addressed right now, managed by the recyclers, the situation is really underwhelming. In all the components that I've listed out for solar panels, plastics are they're the non-targeted ones. These are generally burnt and definitely not recovered in any appreciable volume. And the challenge are multifolds actually. The challenge is that, of course, these are fluorinated, so there is I think there is a whole concern on what sort of grade and what sort of grade you would be able to recover. There is, of course, the way they are designed and embedded into the product itself. There are challenges around it because these are like glued in between the solar cell and the glass. So these are really difficult to take out. And many recyclers often, that's why, end up switching to incineration methods that just burn off this polymeric layer. So these are, and of course, I think once they are looking at the overall economics also, I think they are able to get, like many other products, they are able to recover better by targeting metallic components and even glass for that matter. Polymer really comes late. So yeah, just to summarize, I think plastics, even in solar panels, even though they look more homogeneous compared to others, as you highlighted, because of the way the module itself is designed, these are difficult to be, recycled and recovered. But I would also like to highlight a new innovation that's happening in solar panels. The situation that I described so far is from the installed capacity or the modules that were being manufactured until, I would say, a couple of years ago. The ones that are coming right now into the market, they are having new design changes. So they are eliminating the use of backsheets, and they are having, like a glass to glass contact. So they are coming away, they're moving away from this 3-layer backsheet, glass and solar cell and encapsulant sort of model, and they're eliminating the backsheet entirely. So when we would revisit this conversation and the contribution and how the plastics are being managed for the solar sector, we would see that, of course, the share of plastics in solar panels would come down, and then it would be encapsulant alone that need to be managed. But I think these are, of course, the challenge would, I think, remain because the encapsulant is again tied up. But gradually, I think from the product design point of view, there are some improvements happening in the sector already.
That is really interesting to hear. And I think, Akanksha, from our end as well, because working in e-waste, we have also faced similar challenges. And one, I think, hypothesis that often comes in our mind also is always been that considering how heterogeneous collection ends up being, yes, there are challenges in sort of mapping out the forward supply chain of where to send this out to. And this has also been the challenge that I think we have seen ourselves working with the project that Pranchu was also mentioning, the project that we're undertaking with GIZ and finding these supply chains or building these supply chains for plastic waste from e-waste, right? And one of the basic things that we ended up observing was that the offtake specifications are so narrow and so precise that you sometimes have to rethink the way you're also collecting. And actually that brings me to my question to Reva. So Reva, considering the work that we have been building towards in our project, what conditions do you think need to be in place for e-waste plastic recycling to actually be able to be scalable?
Thanks, Shivangi. Good afternoon to everyone. I will also build on from what Akanksha has highlighted, especially in terms of the heterogeneity of material and also lack of focus on plastics. You've also mentioned that in your opening remarks. So, I mean, right now, we all know that within the EPR rules and within the e-waste in general, in the entire ecosystem, we see a lot of focus on more valuable materials in the streams. I mean, there is obviously more focus around the valuable materials and an increased focus around critical raw materials that can be mined from these end-of-life electronic waste. However, plastic remains unseen. And because of the current focus of the EPR rules, at least in India, we see that it is also definitely the weightage is more on the metals. And we hope that, increasingly the focus will also come on plastic. So that is one, I think, that has also resulted in, different ways people are now collecting e-waste because the focus is on metals and the generation of the certificates on the platform is also tied to that. So that is one. But aside from what has happened in the policy framework over the last few years, what has also why plastics also is sort of difficult to manage, especially the engineered plastics that are present in the electronics, is that one, you've been mentioning many times, the heterogeneity of the material itself. That is definitely there, and because it needs to be engineered to deliver specific performance for different products. There are many additives, there are flame retardants. So as such, it is also not so easy to manage. And there are very different kind of plastics that are present across the different products. I mean, the plastics in, for example, laptop and mobile phones have to deliver a different kind of performance and value to the consumers as opposed to the plastics in, let's say, washing machines or air conditioners and others. And so if we were to also narrow our focus on what are the current materials, at least listed across different rules, not just in India, but also globally, then we can see where do we find the most opportunity for deriving values at the end of recycling as well. So that's why our focus in the project in the circular pathways for high value plastics is also on high value plastics to solve for more valuable material and then to move further down that value chain. So that is one. And I think sorting is also a major challenge at the level of recycling and dismantling. There are, from what I know from different actors and stakeholders, the plastics are also not marked consistently. They might be marked one, and they might be marked as ABS and HIPS, and it might be a different kind of engineered plastic in the product itself. So there is also need for better practice when it comes to marking of these plastics within the products themselves and across different kind of products and internationally as well. because these are products that also move through different parts of the world. So it's also important to have those kind of standards and practices put in place that enable recycling at the end. So of course, for then design for recycling is very important. We need definitely more, homogeneity in the materials that are being used, more standardizations there on the upstream side itself, to enable us to recycle it in the downstream, because you can have many collection channels. What we are also currently experimenting with you, but if it is not marked properly, that in itself, I mean, all our efforts downstream will render, will be rendered useless, or might not yield the results that we are looking to get. So yeah, so I'll stop here for now, and yeah, back to you.
I mean, absolutely, very, very important point, Reva, that you bring up from a marking perspective, because if I have to do large scale sorting, for example, for any material I'm getting, even if it's the same product line, even if it's the same brand, I do need to give a certain level of sorting, and I very well can't, for example, look microscopically at each piece of plastic and be able to segregate it from there. And actually that brings us perfectly to, Stefan, my question to you, because given your work in, for example, digital product passports, what role do you see something like that playing in solving this issue when we're talking international movement of material? What has your experience been like in this sector and engaging with different stakeholders about minimizing solutions?
Yeah. Thanks, Shivangi. And first of all, thanks also to everyone for listening in. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's an interesting discussion that is, as we already hear in the first few questions being answered, way more complicated than metals. And if I look at it from our perspective, on the interface of digital product passport, is that just because even a plastic can be marked ABS doesn't mean it's the same composition of ABS as other types of ABS. And a digital product passport might solve that, or it has the potential to solve that. But then, especially what you see in India, or the work we do in India with our recyclers there, is that even after dismantling a product, if it were to have a digital product passport, it might not survive with the plastics, or it might at that point be separated from the other types of material and components. So you really need to make sure that the information survives past the initial dismantling step of a device being whole, containing DPP, being dismantled into its subcomponents. And then we all know how many layers the onion of dismantling and recycling has, if I can say it like that. It contains many layers, and that information might not survive from the initial dismantling to the next step where another sorting step is processed. So even in that case, it's extremely critical that the first party that gets in touch with the DPP is extremely knowledgeable in being able to separate these things according to its DPP, if it were to exist, right? We might still actually have a few years before it gets there, but we already see that when it comes to our software, you can document as many types of plastics that you want, but that most don't do it. And that most say, okay, even if I recognize ABS, it's then going to be a mix of ABS. And because of the different compositions, I always use ABS as an example. ABS being a thermoplastic, is very difficult to then mix with other types of ABS because they melt at different points, they flow at different rates, and we're not out of the woods yet, even with the DPP.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also beyond the first receiver of plastics as well, if the first receiver is to, for example, process the material either via dismantling or via recycling, then either you have a process that could recertify that material and sort of reintroduce DPP there. Yeah, it becomes complicated because, again, manufacturing itself all over the world is spread all over the world, right? So given the international nature of manufacturing, and India itself currently is still an assembly first country, right? So majority of the manufacturing of products that happens in India is still very much assembly first in nature. Yes, Stefan.
Without needing to recertify, if the DPP is read out correctly and the plastics are sorted by type, and then first dismantler is knowledgeable and skilled enough and has space to manage different types of plastics and keep them stored properly, then the only challenge it really becomes is an economics challenge. Is, do you have the space and time and the market for the different buyers of those plastics, or might you just as well put them together? And I think without recertification, it becomes manageable by SKU. You almost, you have large SKU databases of different types of plastics that you could offer in your marketplace, and that could already be a solution. Yeah.
No, that is very true. Reva, I'm coming back to you actually. My next question is towards you. Given the practical complexities of all of this, have you seen, because we are trying to also identify what levers can we pull to promote or to push this marketplace creation if it is not happening organically? And one of the levers that immediately comes to mind is policy, right? Policy. Have you seen policy become one of the levers that can tilt the scales in favor of creating such an ecosystem internationally?
So, Shivangi, from what I know of the policies that exist in different countries, including the EU, India, and China, there is not a strong focus on e-waste plastics as of now. I mean, there's not a focus squarely on the subject, one. However, that is not to say that there are no efforts being made. There are a lot of projects. There is also a lot of R&D going on. For example, what we are also trying to do with our project, trying to develop the circular value chain, identify how it could possibly be done. So that is one. Also, while we see that there are requirements for use of recycled content in many product streams, there is no such requirement, at least for the engineered plastics in case of e-waste specifically. So that is one. And like what Author Stefan was also that DPP. I mean, we also imagine that digital product passport will sort of enable some of these actions going forward. But again, it will not be a silver bullet. We will still need to pull at a lot of levers. I mean, a lot of levers have to sort of work together in this case to really develop a circular solution. And definitely policy can, globally, domestically, definitely can be a very strong lever. But it will need to be accompanied by a lot of other actions. For example, sorting. Sorting itself, you need a lot of, technologies also to sort. To identify what is ABS, what is HIPS, what kind of ABS is it, what are the kind of additives in a particular material. So we will need also more advanced sorting tech and also training with those tech. Within, at least if we look at our ecosystem, then we would also need to train the workers to be able to sort different kind of plastics. Right now, again, there is a certain degree of, success with sorting in different recycling facilities, but it can be improved much more. And also, design will have to take care of a lot of these issues already at the beginning. I mean, if we don't address design problem, if we don't look at, if we don't invest in R&D on the design itself, then it will be an issue. I mean, we have some, I think, results from what we have seen from EU Horizon projects. They have, for example, we know of one project called Increase. Maybe Stefan also knows of it. So they have a recyclability assessment tools that also helps the designers also redesign the products and materials in a way that they can become, good for recycling at the end of life. We definitely also need technologies and know-how in setting up these dedicated lines. there is need to understand what kind of business modeling do we need for e-waste plastics or engineered plastics. Maybe engineered plastics from different material streams can, come in and get recycled in one kind of facility. Right now, we know we have e-waste facilities, we have end-of-life vehicles facilities, and so there are products that are also, there are engineered plastics in automobile as well in that sector. And that is, at least in terms of just the size of the automobiles, it is a bigger volume fraction that can come into some of these facilities as well. So modeling and investment around those things are also very important to be leveraged, to be created for these specific solutions, I would say.
Absolutely. There's a certain level of specialization beyond once you've gone past the point of just dismantling the product that you need to start bringing in. If you actually need to create good, high quality solutions. There's solutions that technically exist, but they don't preserve the quality of the material to the extent that it should be preserved to. Stefan, you had a point to add.
Not a point, more a question to Reva.
Yes.
If we talk policy, in this case, maybe India is really the place to discuss policy. Of course, the topics you raise include those of treating plastics in organized facilities, but 90% probably of the e-waste is not handled in an organized facility, or probably first received and dismantled by an informal person. What could inclusion look like in that sense in policy? Because I think that's actually maybe even more important than that's where really a lot of the information gets lost. I'm quite curious to your point there.
No, definitely, and a very good point raised. We obviously know that 90% of the e-waste is recycled, is managed and recovered in the informal sector. A lot of what we also assumed prior to this project was that the focus remains on the precious metals because that is also very widely known in India, that there are these very long-standing informal sector networks, hubs, where e-waste is being, channelized from across the country, gotten, then recovered in very crude fashion, leading to occupational health hazards for the workers themselves who are working on this, and of course environmental pollution that has effects on the larger population as well. Interestingly, while doing this project, we are also undertaking a study to understand what's really happening in the ecosystem, with specifically looking at the high value plastics. And what we found was that there are recyclers in the informal, semi-formal space that are recycling plastics. They're even supplying to some of the OEMs for making switches, switchboards, and some of these things. However, the brands won't or the companies that are sourcing these materials will also not publicize it or openly admit that this is being done. However, we know that there are recyclers who are doing this. So they call themselves compounders in some of these hubs where e-waste is being managed. And there are e-waste plastic recyclers, e-waste plastics recyclers that are also doing it. There is definitely a need for major improvement when it comes to environmental and health safeguards in those facilities. And the fact that we don't have right now recognition of the informal sector. And when we talk about informal sector, in this case, especially in the case of e-waste, we also need to understand there are collectors, there are aggregators, and the informal recyclers, and then the workers. So the informal recyclers that employ the workers, their facilities, I think that's where the major complexity of solving for pollution and solving for greater recoverability of different kinds of high value materials lies, is how do we convert those facilities into facilities that comply with all these requirements. And So the burden of that work actually lies with these informal facilities, not with the workers themselves, not even with, I feel also like collectors and aggregators is sometimes not where the problem lies in terms of environmental issues or health and safety. We know that a lot of times also from the formal sector, there is leakage to the informal recyclers because they can sometimes give you better value or better money for the e-waste itself. So for when it comes to e-waste plastics, these are some of the findings. I think we are also consolidating these findings. We're also trying to delve deeper into data on this, and in the coming months we will also be able to share the findings with the larger group as well.
Thank you, Reva. Yes, I think it's a very huge problem. I think that's the only simplest way I can describe how complex this whole conundrum is and how to solve this. I'm really curious, Akanksha, if from your experience, if you've seen what kind of evidences do you think usually push the required changes or the required measures into policy? What evidences do you think are needed then that could push these measures into policy?
Yeah, I think evidence-based research is definitely the starting point for any sort of policy or regulations that we would run. And I think for this field particularly, what I've also been observing from the discussions happening right now is that we would need a lot of action research. When we talk about, let's say, do we want to bring in more clauses in our e-waste management regulations? When we say that, do we want to introduce a new incentive scheme, a new policy, or do we want to put a mandate on any stakeholder, be it a recycler or a manufacturer? It can't be done in of course, a blanket way, because every product and the kind of plastics that go into it, how it's built, how it's made, how distributed it is, what are the segments it's feeding into, all of this is just so different and varied. We would need a lot of action research and demonstrations to figure out each of these parts. So, for example, let's say when we say that, put a mandate on manufacturers that they are designing the product right? We need to really do action research and examine what design changes can they bring in, how they're assembling the products versus, let's say, what kind of materials are they using in the first place. All of that needs to be vetted through, and evidence needs to be built in around that, so that evidence and that proof can actually inform those regulations, those standards, and so forth. We would also need, let's say, when we are doing when we're trying to understand how to improve the economics and the economic viability of recovering plastics in the first place by addressing, let's say, post-consumer waste management, we would again need to do a lot more research on the collection system that we talked about, the whole dismantling and the disposal aspects of the supply chain that we talked about. So there's a lot of action research needed on all of these front. This would also, as I was mentioning before, inform that what kind of instruments and particularly market instruments that would be needed. As I was saying, do you need an incentive scheme, or do you need a viability gap funding? Do you need a production linked incentive? So all of these need to be figured out and built on grounded research in the geography also that we are working. While we have many parallel examples of how these are being done in, let's say, a European nation, or even in Americas, or in our East Asian nations, I think all of them have a different, like a society that they live in, right? And the infrastructure and the consumer behavior, all of this is completely different. So a lot of ground research is needed for Indian context, for our geographies and the societies and the consumer behaviors that we live in, that should involve a lot of these things. Yeah.
Akanksha, that's bringing me to a question. I know we have not discussed that particular question in our conversations before, but I'm just wondering, there's always a balance that we have to strike between making sure that any policy that we are creating, or any action that we are creating for that matter, is backed by a certain level of thoroughness or a certain level of research or information gathering that has been done in the past, and then you go through an iterative process of applying it, learning, then figuring out how to apply those learnings back and improve the system. But there also sometimes needs to be a sort of sense of urgency to push these things. And sometimes we also are like a little impatient ourselves to see those results. And given how difficult or how narrow that balance is to strike, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that aspect.
So if I could rephrase, you're asking me, how do you balance how do you balance to solve for the challenges of now versus the systems for later? Is that the question?
Yes, you can see it like that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I think when I look at from like this sector's point of view, I think also in terms of where efforts are currently concentrated, we of course are a lot of us in the sector are working very actively on the problem of here and now, which is the waste volumes that are coming in now, and and how do you, let's say, set up infrastructure around it? How do you build capabilities on technology side, on personal skills side, and so forth, so forth. I think a lot of us in the ecosystem are focusing on that, and that needs to be like doubled down on, and that would of course require certain bringing in some of these amendments to our waste management regulations, shifting the focus from a metal heavy viewpoint to some of these let's say not just value recovery but also like environmental mitigation, like pollution mitigation, right? But I think this is also the time that we need to start thinking of some of these long-term systemic changes that we would want to bring in. If we are not really addressing the design problem right now. So all of the PLIs that we are disbursing, right, either to manufacture batteries, to manufacture solar panels, even for the electronics and so forth, I think we are incentivizing for the same kind of product, maybe improving on the performance and on localization, but not so much on the circularity and the eco-design aspects of it. So I think we need to really start generating more evidence that I was talking about, doing a lot more action research as to what can actually be fed into some of these schemes, some of these incentive documents that enables that the next wave of waste that we would see is more recyclable, is more benign in that sense, and you already have a system and an infrastructure that is able to manage it. You don't have to then work on the problems of today, which is a complex, unrecyclable or a heterogeneous product. You are really creating systems. So yeah, I think while a lot of us in the ecosystem are focusing on that, I think maybe working jointly with manufacturers more actively and them actually coming forward and taking a lot more ownership is very important.
Absolutely. I think as Reva put it, there's no one silver bullet that's going to solve this. Maybe we move away from metals altogether and create plastic bullets. I don't know. But one of the evidence is actually, because we've been talking about how evidence is so critical, one of the evidences is also to understand what volumes and what specifications exactly we're talking about. And one activity that helps a lot with that is mass balance quoting, sort of understanding exactly what kind of material and what volumes of material we're talking about. Stefan, my question is actually to you. What has been your experience in this regard in creation of mass balance reporting, and how important do you think these quality standards and certifications are? I have a follow-up question to that. I'll just ask that here before you answer. Follow-up to that is, who do you think should take the lead in this? Should it be the regulators? Should it be the industry, the OEMs, or should it be both? Yeah,
thank you for that question. Good one. The second one is of course a very subjective question. So let's park that one and then start with mass balance. So mass balance, to me, it's critical in especially the composition of e-waste and making sure that no material gets lost. But then if we really talk about the principles that we discuss here today of what is the composition of different types of plastics and how are they mixed, then it becomes, almost an extra step that may not even be necessary when it's really about the output, right? So, of course, at the risk of, making my own model seem less important here because we work so strongly on mass balance principles. The mass balance principle is really meant to show that a facility can operate in a responsible manner. And that means that when X metric tons of material go into any type of process, that also you can account for X tons of all the different output materials, and plastics is one of them. However, at the moment when you have plastics itself, it almost becomes managed by the economics itself. So if you have 1,000 kilos of HDPE plastics or PP that you want to sell to a party and that party buys it, do you really need a mass balance principle when that person then has 500 kilos in a bag sitting in their warehouse that they received? Probably not. At that point you have an accounting process that says, hey, I didn't get what I paid for. And the facility may have to ask themselves, is like, why did I sell 1,000 kilos? Maybe my mass balance was wrong. So mass balance is very important to help you create the inventory and make sure that you know exactly what type of plastics you have at any given moment so that you can rely on that information when you interact with the market. But once the financial transaction happens, mass balance has very little value. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because facilities need to rely on, at least the people in charge of a facility need to know what they have in inventory. That's where mass balance is extremely important. Yeah. And then who should take the lead on this? I personally, even though I have my opinions on policy and governments, I think a strong driver should always be, business, first of all. And that is not to say don't regulate. And actually, I think there should be significant regulation in this topic, especially when it comes to EPR and including plastics and including the informal sector. But I also believe that big driver of this should be, can we build a system that is profitable? And what currently bothers me personally, this is an opinion, bothers me the most, is that recyclable plastics have a very hard time competing to virgin plastics.
Yeah.
And that is a price thing, and no amount of policy will really solve the fact that if you bring it into policy, you're going to have to somehow also financially subsidize something that is making a loss.
That is true. Yeah.
And I think we need to do a lot of work personally on making sure that the facilities we have been discussing today and the processes that they use and maybe digital product passport are implemented in a way that they can compete with virgin plastics. And that is, I think, the main challenge from business perspective.
I completely agree. And I think if I'm looking at past examples of sort of business-led innovation and standardizing things, one of the biggest examples is USB standardization that has happened across in the past 15 years. Even though this is a dated reference at this point in time for a lot of people, but yes, there was a time when a lot of us used to carry 10 different cables because everything used a different cable, and it was ultimately a standard being developed and ultimately being adopted, largely voluntarily. That sort of prompted this change, which also made it easier. And I wonder, Stepan, I just would like to hear your view on this as well, of the different recipes that ultimately get used in at a company to company level or OEM to OEM level, product to product level. Some level of sharing of that information or standardization of that information will also not solve the current problem, but will definitely solve the future problem to a certain extent.
I'm glad you bring that one up, because that is absolutely one of the main problems or hurdles when it comes to making this whole system profitable or driving costs down, is the fact that any OEM or any producer can just make a mix that they want, and there's no standardization and there's nothing really that comes into play here. And it's going to be a careful balance of what is a free market allowed to make. Is suddenly a new producer not going to be able to produce type of innovative plastic anymore that wasn't previously on the market and is excluded from all the standard labels that we have decided today. This is always the argument with USB, since you bring it up too, is well, does that kill innovation, or what about USB, the fourth type of USB that's going to come after USB-C? It's the same with plastics. Is you can do that, but you need to leave the door open at least to what it would need to bring a new plastic into that standard framework, because otherwise you would exclude the possibility to explore new types that maybe solve some problems of the old ones too.
Yeah. Thank you, Stefan, and thank you to all our speakers. Actually, it's been a very insightful conversation for me as well, because there's so many questions that have come up for me as well. I think one of the questions I see, Akanksha, you've already answered, but someone in the chat had asked if there are any other examples that you can immediately think of where this action-based research is happening. Okay, Reva, please.
Oh, sorry, I thought Akanksha is about to answer, so I was just waiting.
Please.
No, so I mean, I just wanted to also add 2 points that have also surfaced during the course of this conversation. One, to directly hook on to what Stefan is also talking about, having businesses being the driver for developing these solutions. I agree completely with him. And something interesting that we found during our research, it's also sort of an action research, because we are also constantly learning from the work that we are doing with Karu Sambhav and with the other recyclers in developing this value chain, which is specifically for polycarbonate plastics with Covestro as one of our other private sector partners. So in the informal sector, what we also found out while doing this research was that they were able to supply to many of these industries cheaper, the recycled plastics at a cheaper rate than the virgin plastics. There's also a specific moment right now where the recycled plastics are also looked at more favorably, as well as their cost is also seen as less than virgin plastics because of the ongoing war and the geopolitical situation. But this is something we found on the field, and it was quite eye-opening for us as well, because we keep hearing that recycled plastics needs with virgin plastics, but they are not able to, of course, with making sure that these facilities are environmentally compliant, are also socially compliant, and have labor regulations in place. Obviously will push up the cost, and making sure that there are ETPs in these facilities, and then formal sector obviously will increase the cost of the recycled plastic material. But this was a finding that we also had from the field research that we did. And also regarding the consumer behavior, I think this is also something that keeps coming up. A lot of brands tell us that, yes, we are sourcing recycled plastics. And recyclers also tell us, yes, we are selling to, including formal recyclers, and we are selling to brands. We are selling this kind of recycled plastics to the brands. But they don't want to talk about it openly. They don't want the names of the brands out in the open, because they have this sense that the consumer perception is not very favorable when it comes to the products that use recycled plastics. And so that is one. And of course, disposal as consumer behavior when it comes to disposal is also something that needs to be also strongly worked on, at least in India. So yeah, just two of those points. And in terms of action research, what we are trying to do in the project is also to document all this experience of the work that we are doing, And I think we will have very, very interesting findings for different kind of actors, for different kind of recyclers in the ecosystem while working on developing this value chain. And while we do this in India, the other part of the project has also worked in China. They've worked with automobile engineered plastics, specifically the headlights as a polycarbonate fraction. So that study is already released, and we'll be happy to share the findings from that. And and there are a lot of EU-funded projects in EU looking at R&D, looking at how this can be further taken up. There's Increase project that was a Horizon project with many organizations part of that consortium to develop solutions with different kind of factors, because it really needs a sort of coordinated solutioning as well. Yeah. And I'll stop here. I'll let Akanksha also maybe add on the other action research projects.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just build upon where you left, Reva. I think there's a lot that's happening through grants and through support from philanthropies. We of course need a lot of continuity in some of these action research, and also the slight gap in a single action research or a single demonstration to a full-scale commercialization. I think that's also a very crucial gap to be filled in, because that would need a lot of conversation on how do you scale up, what is now feasible, what can you recommend at a mass scale, and roll it out as a program. I think there's a lot. That's also like a area which I see needs more attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what has become more and more clear for us as well is that a lot of the supporting work that needs to be done needs to be an enabler but can't be the driver, as Stefan also pointed out, and so have Reva, you and Akanksha, is that it needs to sustain on its own eventually, right? While the scaffolding can be built to lift it off at least once, it needs to sustain itself. Otherwise, it will eventually die down, or it will be very susceptible to any market changes which are not entirely economic in nature. It could be susceptible to a lot of changes. So yes, it ultimately needs to be driven. I think I also concur with Stefan there. It needs to be long-term driven by businesses, but definitely needs some enabling support right now to get it off the ground, and at least build those bridges, do that matchmaking that needs to happen initially. Thank you to all our speakers today. I think we are also over our time now. So many questions I have. I think for all three of you, I might reach out to you separately with my questions. But thank you so much for giving your time today. It was wonderful hearing you speak. I would also like to thank our sponsors, Apple, Dell Technologies, Canon India, Cisco, and Nothing, and of course to GIZ, our partner for this webinar. Next webinar, we will be focusing on sort of the practical and technical aspects of solving e-waste plastics issue, and really looking forward to that conversation as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.